Over the past 2 decades, my research has been driven by my passion to help protect our natural world while helping to advance humanity's capacity to one day explore caves with robots. Tonight I'm going to share with you all a collection of anecdotes and a process which I believe will be beneficial to helping you all to both promote personal and professional growth. So I became obsessed with caves in about 2001. I was working on my master's research, and I was studying bird habitat in southeastern Arizona, and I was modeling habitat selection of a select number of birds, which had absolutely nothing to do with caves. So during my first year of my program, I received an email from a buddy of mine. He was an archaeologist studying ritualistic cave use by the ancient Maya. And one of his study sites he described as having this enormous bat roost. And he also mentioned that the cave was being considered for adventure tourism. And because of that, he thought it would be a really good idea to have a biologist come down and evaluate the cave before it became flooded with tourists. And he had known about my growing interest at the time with bats and invited me to come down and join him. So although this project had absolutely nothing to do with my master's research, adventure beckoned and I responded. There are turning points, pivotal moments that help to shape and define us as humans. And those 2 weeks in Belize was one of them for me. I left Belize knowing that I was going to become a cave scientist. Now, since then, I've led over 80 expeditions around the world. And while I've continued to study bats, my research has expanded to include a bevy of cave-dwelling animals, from apex predators to the most diminutive cave-dwelling invertebrates. And I wanted to share with you all some of those discoveries. This is a composite image representing about 70 species we believe all to be new to science. Roughly half of those have been formally described, and by that I mean we went through the process of writing the papers, publishing the papers, and then ultimately birthing these animals to the world as new species. The remaining half are still awaiting description. And what's always struck me when I do this sort of work is that whenever I enter a cave that I know no one has studied before, and that happens a lot in my business, I get as giddy as a 5-year-old boy, because I know that I stand a good chance of finding something new. And this is a testament to some of that work right there. While I was preparing for this talk, for some reason I kept returning to Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Now, in Plato's cave, prisoners were captured at birth, bound in chains, and bound in such a way to where they could only view the cave wall directly in front of them. And behind them were objects that were paraded behind them, and they were seeing the shadows of those objects. Now, to them, this was their reality. This was their truth. A pivotal moment occurs when one of the prisoners is released, actually drugged to the surface, according to Plato's account of this thought experiment that he created, and forced to see what the world really is like. And he was blown away. He realized that everything that he'd seen up until this point was a mere illusion, and that his perception was askewed. So his epiphany was short-lived. According to Plato, they recapture him, drag him back down into the cave, and he assumes the position where he was before all this happened. And he tries to explain that what he saw on the surface to the others that were still bound and did not see what he saw. Well, according to Plato, they laughed at him. They dismissed him as crazy. And to me, as I've gone through this process over the past 20 years, it's been a lot like, at least at first, looking at shadows on a cave wall. And actually, I've done that as part of my job too. But I actually saw this transformation occur because when I first started this business, I knew very little about what I was doing because I was green. And when we all start out with something, if we don't have a lot of training, like in academia, typically folks just kind of push you into the deep end of the pool with no floaties and expect you to swim. And I did that okay. That project in 2001, I prepared the best I could, but I realized that I could have done better. So over the years, I've evolved in my thinking and the way that I conduct field research. And I have been able to elevate my science because of it. So what I've done here is I've prepared what I'm calling Plato. This is an acronym for this process that I'm going to walk us through. The P in Plato stands for prepare. And what I've learned over the years is how long it takes to prepare for a given project is directly correlated to the complexity of the project. I can spend anywhere from days to weeks in preparation for a given research expedition. I develop a raft of preparation documents for this research. Oftentimes, much to the chagrin of people who are working with me because they then have to read everything that I wrote. But I create operations plans that describe everything associated with the project, from the objectives to the logistics and where we're staying and how we're doing the work and everything. I also have a safety plan that itemizes the risks that we could encounter. And we have mitigative strategies to help us prepare for those risks. I also have a checklist. I have checklists for everything, actually, because, over the years, even now, occasionally I'll forget something. And, having a list really helps. Having a list really helps us with just about anything, right? I'm kind of lost in the grocery store without one. Turning our attention to the L in Plato. It's learn. And I've further subdivided this into the ABCs of learning. The A in the ABCs of learning is having an absorbing mind, having a willingness to absorb information both from our environment, which a lot of times we do intuitively, but also to have a willingness to absorb information from others. In 2019, I was conducting a study in Belize, Runaway Creek Nature Reserve. And I had the opportunity to work with some of the most amazing people I could have possibly imagined to have a chance to work with. And one of our objectives for this project was to deploy trail cameras at caves so we could monitor wildlife use. And everything was going well. Our work was progressing. But one of the guys had a day off, so he took some time off. He went home. And we get into the field the next day with a slightly different team composition. And we quickly enter into this comedic routine as to who's got the rope. It's like, I don't have the rope, you got the rope. I don't have the rope, you have the rope. And we're kind of looking at each other. Finally, we realize that our friend who was in Belmopan, he has the rope. He didn't know it. It was in the bottom of his backpack. But we needed the rope because we were tying it to our trail cameras. Well, these guys all have doctorates from Jungle University. They know the bush like the back of their hand. And one of the guys walked over to a plant, which I later learned was a rhododendron. And he grabbed some roots and he walks over and he just starts fastening the trail camera with the roots. And the lesson that I learned from this is, my gosh, the jungle provides, especially when you know how to extract the resources from the jungle like these guys do. I also had a bit of an epiphany of sorts where I saw that it kind of reinforced what I'd been thinking over the years, is the importance of working with local collaborators. Because the people that live in the environment where you're going to work, they're going to know the terrain far better than you could ever imagine to. The B in the ABCs of learning stands for beginner's mind. Now, martial artists and Zen Buddhists describe this concept as approaching each subject with the humility of a beginner. And by doing this, we abandon that fallacy that we're an expert with nothing left to learn. The C in the ABCs of learning stands for curious mind, being a lifelong learner. Tremendously important in life to know a lot or a little about a lot of different things, right? And there's a lot of benefits to this approach, and I'll mention a few here tonight. Firstly, it will improve self-confidence and self-esteem. It will also increase your cognitive ability and your memory capacity, and it can make you a more successful person. The A in Plato stands for adapt. Now, I've learned over the years that Murphy's Law is the rule and not the exception in the field. If anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. Vehicles break down, somebody gets sick, there's, the cave that you want to go into is flooded. That happened this past summer. Or there's, disagreements amongst personnel. Any of these things can derail productivity. And I've learned over the years that it pays to be malleable, which is a great metaphor for life, right? How many times in our lives do we experience things beyond our control? And we can either resist it or we can just kind of go with it. So much easier to go with it. In 2016, I led a 3.5-month expedition to Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island. And our charge was to search for and collect endemic insects that were native to the island and occurred on no place else on the planet. Now, the reason why this is so important is about 1,000 years ago, Rapa Nui underwent what is called a catastrophic ecological shift. And when this happened, the ecosystem shifted from a palm-dominated scrub forest to a grassland. And this coincided with the arrival of humans and a prolonged drought, and all of this became the perfect cocktail for immense change on the island, including the extinction of all terrestrial vertebrates. So today, the native fauna is represented by invertebrates, insects. So we were going to some of the most difficult to access parts of the island, and this included caves and cliffs. And when we were doing our cliff work, before we just jumped off a cliff, we wanted to conduct reconnaissance so we would know what we were getting into. So as part of this work, we went to the cliffs, we assessed which ones we would like to study, and we were also looking for natural anchors. We wanted to know where we could secure our ropes. Well, we quickly realized that the cliffs that we wanted to study, there were no anchors around those cliffs where we wanted to study. So we had two options. We either had to abandon that component of the work, and I didn't want to do that because I really wanted to drop a 1,000-foot cliff, or we had to adapt, and we chose the latter. We secured the rope to the front end of the vehicle, we chalked the tires, and then we applied the parking brake, and we had our own mobile anchoring system, which enabled us to conduct the research in a relatively safe fashion. Here I am about to drop about 1,000 feet off of this cliff. Now, to the T in Plato, this represents think, but more specifically, think positively. Now, the benefits of positive thinking have been embraced by Eastern traditions for millennia. And I've been a student of several of these Eastern traditions over the years, so I knew a bit about this idea of having a positive mindset, from that perspective. But as a research scientist, I wanted to know about it through a scientific lens. So I went to the literature, and this is what I found. Over 30,000 papers on positive thinking, the benefits thereof, have been published since 1952. And I wanted to share one of those with you all. This study was conducted by a Japanese team, and they had two test groups. One test group was they were listening to positively themed music, looking at positive images, puppies and kittens and that sort of thing. And the other group listened to the Japanese Constitution. Once this was done, they then completed a questionnaire. And this is what the researchers found. They found that those who were exposed to positively themed media exhibited more flexible thinking, and they were also able to generate more unconventional and atypical ideas. And if you think about it, if we go back to the A in Plato, that ability to adapt. What happens if you go into the field with a positive mindset? You're going to be more inclined to be able to MacGyver your way out of a bad situation should one arise. So, through fastidiously preparing, applying the ABCs of learning, adapting as situations change on the ground, and choosing to think positively, I'm providing here a winning formula for overcoming adversity. Now, when you boil it all down, overcoming adversity is all about grit, right? You know, that doggedness, that sheer determination to push through. And we all have it within us, that capacity to push through. Some of us have to dig a little bit deeper than others, but we're all able to do that. We can all muster that grit. I had a personal challenge that I had to overcome in September of 2008. I lost my grandfather. And, you know, my biological father has never been part of my life, and this man was my dad. He raised me, you know, taught me everything I know, took the belt to me when I deserved it. And so anyhow, I had to return to Georgia for the funeral, and I to be with my family. But I had to quickly return home because I was preparing for 3 back-to-back expeditions that were going to carry me through the rest of the year. I was working in New Mexico, then northern Chile, and then I had to go to Rapa Nui for a few weeks. I had no choice but to dig deep and to tamp down my grief and just to push through, because, you know, that's what he would have expected of me anyhow. Also, what I've learned to be critically important is working with the right folks. I've been incredibly blessed over the past 20 years in working with some of the most talented, intelligent, and just wonderful human beings. And I also have to admit that I wouldn't be speaking to you all tonight were it not for these folks. You know, they brought the magic. They supported me. We worked well together as a team and were able to make things happen. Now, I shared with you all some of our discoveries associated with the invertebrates. I wanted to share a few more with you all. Since 2020, we've been studying wildlife use of caves using trail cameras, and we have 3 noteworthy observations. This is the very first footage of a bare-throated tiger heron hunting in a cave. And this animal is a juvenile. You can tell by the plumage. Juveniles in this stage, they have a tiger-striped appearance. We also collected additional information that helped us in developing a paper on cave-dwelling crocodiles of central Belize. And finally, and this to me is the most scintillating of them all, this footage. Female jaguar kills a peccary, drags it about 300 feet into a cave, and then she returns to the surface. A few minutes later, goes back into the cave. About 20 minutes later after that, her cub appears. Apparently what she was doing was she was telling Junior that dinner was on the table. And the 2 proceed to feed underground for several days, only returning to the surface a couple of times. We've also made several contributions to the study of planetary caves, caves beyond Earth. Since 2007, we've published about 30 papers on this topic, exploring various facets of this subdiscipline. One of our studies involved collecting thermal imagery from this aircraft that we used to develop models to predict where we could find caves on the landscape. Now, the reason why this is so important is because lunar caves provide us with a great potential for astronaut shelters. They provide protection against deadly cosmic radiation and could also provide us with access to water ice. On Mars, there are similar benefits for caves there, but they also represent one of the best locations to look for evidence of life. Now, this Plato process, this came straight from the School of Hard Knocks, making mistakes, a lot of dumb ones, and recognizing what works, what doesn't work, and iteratively improving as we went through time. This process, I believe, is useful to everyone in preparing for your journey, in applying the ABCs of learning, adapting when, that ever-changing landscape of life presents us with things that we have to deal with, choosing to think positively, and overcoming the obstacles in your path. So when you embark upon your next expedition, be it in the classroom, the boardroom, the office, or the vast wilderness of life, throw the Plato roadmap into your backpack, because I believe it's a universal guide that can help you all to forge your own extraordinary trail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jut.
Oh, I'm not done yet.
You're not going anywhere. And I'm actually, you stay in here, we're going to share a rectangle together. We get really close if you want.
Wow.
Well, that was a great talk. Thank you so much. I think that was, I had my wife over there telling me how much she likes checklists and was very happy to hear.
Okay, yeah. So it's not just you that uses them, right? Yeah.
I am given lists as opposed to making my own. So we're about the same age. And so I'm guessing you have a good 20 years of spelunking left. At least. What do you have on the horizon? And not just kind of where you might be going, but what kind of knowledge are you trying to generate, to learn, to share with the world?
And what I have like 20 seconds, right?
A little bit of time.
All right, so there's a lot of things on the horizon. Yeah, we should always be looking for what's on that hill beyond, right there. What's on that next hill? So the first project that I have that we'll be starting next year, we're going to Bhutan. And Bhutan is in Central Asia. It is on the foothills of the Himalayas. And we're going to be conducting the first cave study ever conducted in the country. And the objective of this study is, one, to begin to characterize the animals using caves, much like you saw in the slides here. And we're also going to be working with the local communities and going to universities to try to kind of encourage them to start studying caves. We also have a proposal that we're putting in a couple of weeks here, well, maybe longer given the impending government shutdown. Should the NASA gods smile upon us, we'll be returning to Hawaii in the summer.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Sounds like a lot of fun and a lot of interesting work ahead of you. So I want to say again, thank you for sharing your work and your perspective with us. I think we can all learn something. And I would tell you from the conversations that we've had just preparing for this event, and that's something I didn't bring up to you guys, that the SCI Talk speakers, it's not just hey, do you want to give a talk in September? Come on down, talk for 15 minutes. There's a lot of work that goes into this. Spend time with every single speaker, talking about what they want to share, working through their story. And I hope you can tell from Jut put a lot of work into his presentation, and it was a great one. So thank you.
Thank you. So get this though, I get the email from him to do this. And then, I was like, it's kind of short notice, but okay, because I'm a glutton for punishment, so I decided to do it. And then he sends me this book, Talk Like Ted. I'm like, it's like pouring salt in a wound. I'm reading it, and it says, oh, well, this person, they prepared for 6 months. This person had 100 people feeding into how they were designing their talk. I'm like, thanks, dude. But yeah, so there was, as he pointed out, there was a lot of work that went into it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak for you all. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, brother.
Great.
Appreciate it.